Thank you, Jamie.
Take it away. Take it away.
Thank you, Jamie. Okay, today I want to talk to you guys about LEDs. And specifically the new one that I'm coming out with. I'm just going to move this stuff off to the side. This will turn blue a little bit later, and if I remember, I'll bring it back and show you. If you remember, I originally came out, one of my first designs was like the 24, 36, and 48 inch of these LEDs. This is representative of all of them here. It has a reflector here across the top which directs the light down. My first ones were a simple one row of chips and easy to connect with a power cord, and then a daisy chain, meaning that you can connect more than one to each other just by plugging them into each other. They're waterproof. They have the O-rings around them, the whole thing. So you could put these two together, snap it together, tighten this up. This becomes a waterproof connection. You use two per shelf, and then with a jumper cord you go on to the next one, and one of them would get the power coming in. So you can build an entire rack of light with just one power cord. And they're waterproof, like I say. So that was my first LEDs that I come out with. And I had that probably, I don't know, 4 years ago or 5 years ago, something like this. Then I come out with one that was a little bit more powerful. So what I did is I took the same enclosure, the same space here, and put 2 rows of chips. And with 2 rows of chips, that was double the power of the ones with single chips. But I only made it in a 48 inch LED because usually it's larger plants that need more light, not, you know, phals or smaller plants. And larger plants take up more space, so I'm thinking, okay, I just build it in a 48 inch because of heat disbursement and whatnot. You know, we can't do it in the smaller size LEDs. And that was great. So we were able to bloom everything from Phalaenopsis being low light all the way up to Cattleyas and even some Vandas with my 48 inch and with the spike producers, because that was putting out great light. Now the spike producers, this consumes 9 to 10 watts of power. My spike producers, which is the double row, takes 38 watts of power. And so obviously the more wattage you're using, the more strength of the LED that's there. So I always wanted to come out with one that was a little bit more powerful, because I feel that when you're doing Vandas and you're doing some of the higher light Cattleyas, you know, not all Cattleyas need a lot of light, but some of them really need a lot of light to encourage them to bloom properly. And then when you're doing house plants like the asparagus fern, some people start the citrus trees inside. You're doing some of your desert plants, different things, they all want a lot of light. And I always felt that I needed a more powerful light. But with the housing and the board that I was using, it just wasn't possible to be able to do this and do it safely. So what I did was, with newer technology, as technology's improved, I come out with my new light. This is actually 61 to 62 watts. So that's about a 60% increase over my spike producers. Imagine 60% more light over the spike producer. It's still a double row chips, as you can see, but I had to put a little bit more spacing in it just for heat disbursement. So this works really well. I couldn't keep the same housing because, again, heat disbursement just wouldn't allow me to. So what I did was we come up with a really nice high-grade aluminum housing. And this aluminum is really good at dispersing the heat buildup because we have the driver and the chips that are in this, obviously. So the aluminum helps to disperse the heat. These are a little bit warmer than my other LEDs. They're still okay to the touch. I measured the temperature after it was running for about 6 hours, and the lens part of it is up in the 90, 92 degrees, and the back of it, the aluminum, runs 112 to 115 degrees depending where you're touching the aluminum. Still, you know, 112, 115 is hot, but it's still not as hot as what most of us keep our home water heaters at. So it's less than hot water is what I'm trying to tell you. So even if your plants come up and touch the lens, it's not going to burn them. Even if they were touching the aluminum, it's not going to burn the leaves. 110, 112, 115 degrees, it's just not going to bother them. So this is my latest product. It'll be 61 to 62 watts. They're going to daisy chain together just like my other ones. You can run multiples of them to build in series to build a rack. One power cord for the whole thing, 30-inch jumper cables just like my other LEDs. But this you're going to want to use when you have some of the higher light demanding cattleyas, dendrobiums, catasetums, vandas, anything along that way. And then for people that are growing the house plants, of course, like your asparagus fern, citrus, aloe. Aloe would love a light like this, that type of product. Those types of plants is what this product is going to be used for. Do we have any questions?
So you can connect the other lights?
You sure can. You can do a mixed combination of my old lights with the new lights. So you could do a rack that has like, well, you wouldn't use 24s, but you'd have 48s. So you could have 48s down below for 2 or 3, and then this up on top for a level or 2. And they work out fine. There's no issues that way at all. So you're using the same power cords, the same jumper cords that you guys already have, and it's just a matter of putting these on. Makes it simple and convenient. Is there any other questions?
So you can grow different orchids in a baker's rack of different levels.
Sure. So the cool thing is, I generally, when I'm setting up a rack and I'm advising people to do a rack, I like to put the larger plants on the bottom because they are taller, and as they're taller, if you have them in the center, then you're putting really small plants down at the bottom. And I like to have the smaller plants closer to eye level, so I put the taller plants like this or something like this I would put at the bottom, put the lights above those, and then daisy chain up to the next rack. So you can put your dendrobiums, your catasetums and whatnot on the bottom shelf and cattleyas, and then you come up to the next shelf and you could do like your phalaenopsis or slippers or whatever you may have on the next one, and I'll use one power cord. So you're growing different things in the rack at different levels.
2 lights per shelf?
Always 2 lights per shelf, and the reason for that is if you think about your shelf, it's generally 14 to 18 inches deep. If you just put one in the center, what's happening is the light's going down to the center. So the plants in the front don't get as much light, the plants in the back don't get as much light. So you have this hot spot running through the center. So what I like to do and what I encourage everybody to do is take your LED, place it, if your rack comes out to here, place it 3 to 4 inches in from the front, and then the same from the back. Space it in from the back and then connect them. Because the light that's coming out from this little lens that's covering the chips comes out at about 120 degrees. And because we're not having the lights way up high to where the light could spread out for that 14 inches, because it's closer to the plant, at 120 degrees, you're not able to cover that entire shelf. So even although that this is more powerful, and in theory you would say, oh, well, yeah, I could cover that many watts, should do that. Because of the angle that the light comes out, it's not going to cover your entire shelf evenly. So in order to get good coverage on the shelf, you always want 2 LEDs per shelf.
You still have like out of the old lights, or it's like 24, 48, so it's different.
These are all just going to be 48-inch, because again, most of your plants that require higher light are larger. They're not miniatures, they're not smaller. Usually the miniatures are not requiring a lot of light. I look at it as pot size, so they're going to be a larger pot. They're going to be a lot of times a 6-inch or 8-inch or sometimes 10-inch pot. And when you have pot sizes that big, most people grow them on a 48-inch shelf rather than like a 24 or 36. And also because there's a lot of heat disbursement in here, the larger area that I have on the inside, for this tube, it helps to disperse the heat. So with the combination of heat disbursement and also the growing space that most people have for larger plants, which are the ones that require the bigger LEDs, I don't make the more powerful LEDs in a smaller size. I only make the LEDs smaller size in the lower wattage stuff.
So yeah, because some of them, they have less than 24 hours, 24 inch.
Yeah, this is not your light. This is intended specifically for growing on baker's racks so that they can be mounted and hung. You don't have to do that. I mean, if you have a shelf or a cabinet, you could certainly mount this on the underside of a cabinet or any type of shelf and grow it, but it's not for really like a great big plant indoors with just a single light. This is for spreading out and putting multiples of them on a shelf.
So some people are asking for where to get it, so it's on the website now. So
You can go to my website. My website is botanicalleds.com.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Corey did it.
Thank you, Corey. Botanicalleds.com. You can go on, you can check out. I have 4 or 5 different ones when you include the links of various LEDs, but you can go there, check it out, and see what they are. These are not available yet. They'll be available probably by March or April. They're obviously already made, but it's going to take time to get shipped over. I had these air freighted over, which costs an arm and a leg these days, especially since it's such a great big long box. I mean, FedEx, it's just a ridiculous price to get that international. There's no way I could have thousands of LEDs flown over. I mean, you know, you couldn't afford to pay for them. Just the shipping per LED would end up more than what I'm charging for them. So they're being come over by sea, and you know, our ports are a little bit backed up right now. So I'm anticipating it'll be a April kind of rollout before I have thousands of them available.
So there's one comment that they like the new end caps. It's much easier, so I appreciate that.
So what I did was, you know, when you run these and then eventually you get to the end of a last one and you're not going to connect another one to it. So once you get to that point, then you have to figure out, okay, well, what am I going to do? And I used to have, you know, it's still live in there. There's still current that runs through here. And you don't want to leave that open because someone could potentially, a young kid could stick something in there, metal, and, you know, shock himself, whatever. So we have what I call end caps. And I used to have end caps that you had to really force on really hard to get to go on this. And it worked great because we also want to keep this waterproof, right? We don't want water getting in there. So I had the caps made that were intentionally very hard, but you had to just force them with pressure to go on. And so then I started thinking, okay, well, instead of doing that, because so many people had trouble, arthritis in their hands, different things, were having trouble getting the caps on. So I come out with a screw-on cap now. And the screw-on is the end cap that I've been using probably for the last 6 or 8 months, maybe a year now, I don't remember. But the cap just screws on, and then that provides a watertight seal, so water is not going to get in here, and you know, terminates the power so that it's not a live juncture sitting out there that someone could come along and stick something in. So thanks, I'm glad you guys noticed that. Like I said, every time I build these, I try to think of what can I do to improve this. I think I'm on about my 6th version of this particular kind of LED, where just finding little things like changing the end cap, changing the O-ring, whatever. And also, we've gone through some different spectrum changes where I incorporate far red now and different things that helps the plants to bloom faster and grow faster. So just a combination of different things. But every time that I go to make more LEDs, I stop and think to myself, if I could do anything in the world that I wanted, what would I do to my LED to improve it? And if there's anything that I can think of, I incorporate that into my next production. That's, you know, why I come out with this one, because I always said I wanted a higher wattage LED, one that's going to throw out a lot more PPFD. But it just, with this technology, the way I was building it, it wasn't possible because of the heat disbursement. They were just going to get too hot. So eventually we found a newer technology with this aluminum and a different way to do it, and so we made it.
So there's several questions about how do you hang the lights? What
Okay. I didn't even bring any of my hangers, but for me personally, what I like to do is a zip tie around here and a zip tie around there. So 2 zip ties will hold even up to the 48-inch LED. And then I leave a loop. I don't run them tight. I don't cinch up the zip tie. I leave it loose, and so it just sits there. And then if I ever want to slide the light out, I can just slide it out through the loops. But when you purchase the LEDs, I send with you, with the package, little clips, and the clips just snap on, and then you can use a string, a nylon rope, whatever you want, to secure that to the bottom of your rack or whatever. If it's a cabinet, it comes with a little thing you can put a screw through it and just suck it right up to the cabinet, however you want. I don't like those because when you're working around the orchid, sometimes you hit the light and they just pop off, and then you got to pop them back on. They're kind of like spring loaded, you know, they just snap over the top of it. So I prefer just to use zip ties. It's not quite as pretty as using the clips that I send you, but that's just my preference. And these will be the same way. You can use a zip tie, or it'll be a clip that goes over it. And I also have pulleys. If you guys want pulleys, you can buy the nylon pulley. So if you're raising and lowering your lights different distances all the time, you can get the pulleys and just attach the pulley around the LED, and then you can raise it and lower it. But most of us, you put it in at one level, you leave it at that level, you're not raising, lowering. So, you know, pulleys just more stuff that's hanging around that you don't need.
Yeah, because in my office, I use actually fish lines.
Yeah, you're using, yeah, the fishing line, and you run that like, what, 3-4 feet to hang it from the ceiling, right? For each one.
But I like the fish line because in my office, so it doesn't, I don't see the...
it's kind of invisible, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's invisible, so you don't see it. You don't have cords hanging down because he's in a commercial building, obviously, and you know he has the ceiling tiles with the T-strips that run across and whatnot. So he just goes, pops up ceiling tile, runs the fish line through that, and then down to the light, makes a loop. And the lights don't get hot enough where they melt that, right? I mean, they're cool to touch, so that's why you can use a zip tie, you can use the nylon rope, you can use a pulley system, you can use whatever you want, because the lights don't get hot enough to where they're actually melting anything. That's the great thing about my LEDs, is the plants can even grow right up. If you look at Jamie's pictures, I mean, her plants are up in there touching the LED, and they never burn them.
Yeah, our spikes are touching the LED.
And the flowers, the petals and the dorsal, everything's touching. And you've never burned one, you've never fried one.
Any other questions?
Are there any other questions, or is that it? It's an easy crowd today.
Yeah. Talk about the zip tie you have, because you can raise the lights and you can lower the lights depending on the size of your sort of plants. So that kind of a hanging system.
Well, the zip tie is more of a fixed type. You know, you make one loop, so you just have 2 loops hanging down from, say, your metal shelf. Just 2 loops, and you slide it through. But when you go into the, you know, let's say that you have a whole shelf of Phalaenopsis is a good example, a plant like this. You have a whole shelf of these guys, and you're growing them, and they're not spiking yet. So you have the light lower, like maybe around in here, and then as they all start spiking, you have 2 options. You can either let the spike grow right up past the lights, so that the lights might be here, you know, and the spike grows up past the lights, and you let it flower. Or if you have LED that's a little bit more powerful like this, you can just raise the LEDs up so that it's up above all of them, and it's still going to get light down there. So once you raise the LEDs up, if you're going to be messing with the height, then it's easier to have a pulley, and the pulleys are just adjustable. It ratchets up, and then you have a little lever, you let the lever loose, and it goes down. So if you're raising and lowering like a window shade all the time, you know, you don't want a fixed thing like a zip tie, then you go into the pulleys. But if you're just leaving it at the same height all the time, don't waste your money buying a pulley. Just zip ties are only a few cents a piece.
Yeah, the other thing that I actually did was, once my orchids spike is done, or the flowers done, I cut the spikes, so I put a pot underneath it to raise it, so that
so
I don't have to do it on
you do something like this. It's down at the bottom, and then you stick it on a pot to raise it up to move it closer to the light. So you're not raising and lowering that's another way to
so
do
it'll be
it.
closer to the light.
Right. Yep,
Yeah.
you can do that. Because, there's two ways to have higher intensity. You can either have a higher wattage LED like this, and then space it accordingly. Or if you have a lower wattage LED like this, you just put it closer. So light is kind of like, I guess if you think about heat, the closer you get to heat, the hotter it is that you feel, even although it's consistent amount of heat that's being put off, right? Think about a stove. If you have electric stove, the closer you put your hand, the hotter it feels. But when you remove your hand from it, it feels cooler. It's putting out the same amount of heat. It's the distance that makes the difference. So you can take a lower wattage LED like this and put it closer to a plant that requires more light, and it'll serve the same effect as taking a higher wattage LED and holding it a little bit further away. So it's the same as heat. You have to think about heat, how it reacts, and it's the same way with light intensity to your plant, if you can relate that.
Yeah. Everybody is kind of want to confirm that the LED lights is good for cattleyas.
Excellent for cattleyas. Excellent for cattleyas. My spike producers are very good for cattleyas too, but this, it's a 60% increase. You guys know that the more light that you give some plants, just to a certain degree, the better they're going to do. You can't do that with phals, you can't do that with, but the higher light plants, some of them like direct sunlight. So just think about it, a 60% increase in light is going to make your plant just that much happier. You're going to end up with more flowers, maybe even additional spikes that you wouldn't have had with the lower light. They still bloom with the lower light, but if you want more flowers, higher spike counts, it's more light. And of course your water, your nutrients, your Mega Thrive, you got to keep up on all the rest of that. I'm just saying, if all that is equal and you're still not getting the flowers that you want, then it's a light issue.
What about your new LED lights compared to the spike producer lights? What is the difference on that?
Difference is 60%. It's 60% more wattage. And I have PPFD measurements. I'm going to be updating those on my website within the next week or so. And you'll be able to compare the PPFD, which is bottom line. The numbers don't lie. But if you just look at watts, my spike producers are 38 watts. The new lights are 62 watts, 61 watts, right in that area. So, that's a 63% increase over my spike producers.
So, I guess you need both.
You need both, depending on, or possibly all three or all four, depending upon what you're growing and how many plants that you have. You have to separate your plants out by, one, light requirement, and two, the height of the plant. Because the smaller plants you want to group together, and the larger plants you're going to group together, and then you're good, because just height, it's hard to satisfy a plant down here with its leaves, and then also satisfy this one up here with its leaves. They're at two different stages. When we talk about canopy, I'm always looking at like right in the center where these are. So the canopy of this path to me is right in here. These couple of leaves here. So this is what I want to satisfy. But when I'm looking at this cattleya here, I'm looking at all the way up into here. I'm looking like where the mass is. So I'm thinking I need to satisfy this area here versus this area here. Well, that's, 10 inches apart or better. So you want all of these plants that have a similar height of canopy here grouped together, and then you want all of these plants grouped together. For these plants, then you have to start looking at their light requirement. What light do they want? These don't want this light. This is way too much. You don't need to buy this light. What always gets me is people go out and they say, oh, I got this light, it's 1200 watts. Well, first, it's probably not 1200 watts, they're lying to you. And secondly, what are you going to do with it? Are you growing marijuana? We're growing orchids. That's not for orchids, that's for marijuana. But, they buy these really intense lights, and then, this light for this plant, I'd have to have it way up here, because otherwise I'm going to fry this poor little guy. So why am I going to run 62 watts of power when he could be satisfied with 10 watts? So when you buy these really intense lights, you're purchasing something that runs a lot more energy, and then you have to keep it further away to satisfy this guy. Why do you want to do that? Just purchase the one that you can keep at a reasonable distance that uses a lot less energy. It's like buying a Ferrari when, you know, you can only go 30 miles an hour because you live in the city and never get out of the city. What are you going to do with that Ferrari? It wants to go.
Yeah, in my office, I guess it's a control, so I have spikes on there, so it starts to bloom with your lights. And then I have it. Oh, that's the next question. I have my lights on a timer for about 12 hours, 13 hours per day. And so it actually worked out well.
Yeah, you always want to put your lights on a timer. And you can go to my website and check it out. I suggest a smart timer. It doesn't matter what brand smart timer, but one that will hook up to your Wi-Fi. You can run Wi-Fi to your timer, and that way if you want to change the amount of hours, it's easy. Just do it from your phone. You're not down there messing with these little dip switches. You can do it from your phone, and when you know, we go back an hour, we go forward an hour, when that changes and you want it to kind of go more with the sunrise, sunset, it's just easier to change rather than having to go back and get down on the floor and get a safety pin out or something and try and paper clip and try and move those dip switches around, and then it never works, and it's too frustrating. The easy way to do it is just get a smart plug. You plug it into the wall, you hook it up to your home Wi-Fi, you work it off your cell phone, you say, I want it to come on this time, I want it to go off that time, and that's it, you're done.
So Catherine has a question. Should we change the light hours with the seasons?
It's kind of hard to answer that. It depends on the orchid that you're growing. Most of the stuff is more equatorial type stuff. I see a lot of people that do change it and they have great success, and other people that just leave it on either 14 or 16 hours a day and they have equally just as much success. You need to look at the species that you're growing. You need to see where it's from. If it's an equatorial type thing, you know, meaning around the equator, I just don't think it's necessary to change it because they get pretty much the same amount of light all year long. So you could leave it at 14 or 16 hours. If you're growing something that's not more equatorial, then it's up to you. I don't see people having a lot of issue. You need, again, to look at your plant. If it's species, look up the species. If it's hybrid, look at the species that contribute to that hybrid, because some plants would like a shorter day length to induce spiking. Some of them like shorter or lower temperatures to induce spiking, but that's not all plants. So you need to look at the orchid that you have and then go from there.
Does high humidity affect your lights?
No, because the lights are waterproof. You know, humidity or water just doesn't bother them at all. You know, if you're watering and the water's coming down and splashing on them, the lights don't care. They're sealed. They even have, if you notice, the ends even have a O-ring on it. That O-ring, once you put the cap on it and screw it on, provides a watertight seal. You can see this little O-ring is reddish, brownish reddish in color, and you know, obviously it just flips up. I mean, I just moved it up there, but it goes against a little plastic stop. This comes on and screws to the next one. When you screw those together, it's waterproof, so everything is sealed. This is all caulked through here. It has silicone all through it, so it's a sealed unit. That's why there's no parts to change. When something goes bad on one of these, they get thrown out. But these are probably going to last, you know, 5 to 7 years of use, especially only 12, 13 hours a day, because just the chips are rated to last 50,000 hours. That's the expected life for each of these little diodes is 50,000 hours. So if you divide 50,000 hours by your 12 or 13 hours or 16 hours a day that you're running it, you can figure out about how many years life cycle it's going to give you. And that'll be at about 90% from original. Whereas like a fluorescent tube, when you put it in after 6 months, a lot of the real serious growers go ahead and replace their fluorescent tubes every 6 months, at least every year, because they drop down to 80 and 70% after a year, even 80%, some of them after 6 months. So they'll replace them every 6 months. This will give you not over 90% efficiency over a 5-year period. Okay, I think that's it. Check out my website, botanicalleds.com. I appreciate you guys listening to me today, and I know that a lot of you enjoy my products. I hope that more people have the opportunity to check out my LEDs for themselves and give me feedback. Tell me what you guys think about my product. I'm always looking for ways to improve it, and whatever you guys need, let me know. You know how to find me. We'll catch you later.